maybe one of the things that we need to recognize and remember, and particularly our governments, both provincial and federal, is the fact that Canada is a treaty nation. And if we can grasp onto that and just say yes to it, that's true. Canada is a treaty nation. At one time, this fledgling government sent out representatives of the Crown to whistle all the Indians in out of the bush or from across the plains and to register them into treaty, because the Indian problem wasn't the Indians themselves, it was the land and how they were going to access it and its resources. So they marshaled us into treaties, and our chiefs signed documents because those documents were full of promises. And the treaty registrars got back to Ottawa and they started looking at all those documents and they went, holy mackerel, we've made an awful lot of promises here. That's going to cost an awful lot of money. What are we going to do about this? So they got their heads together, and one of the smarter ones said, hey, let's create a legislation that'll outline how we can go about delivering those, so we can have control over how we serve out those promises. And they thought, wow, that's a really, really good idea. So they struck a legislation called the Indian Act that would govern how those promises were delivered. And then they realized that the legislation wasn't quite big enough to do the job, so they said, we need to create a bureaucracy that can translate the act so that it can translate the way that we can save on delivering those promises, because there was a whole lot of them. And that's how things came to be the problem and the issue, is they signed treaties that said that they were going to deliver all of these promises. They realized that it was going to cost way too much money in order to fulfill all those promises, so they created a legislation that they could use as a smokescreen to cover up their lack of delivering on those promises, and then they had to create a bureaucracy to even deepen the smokescreen so that the general body politic could think they were actually doing the job they set out to do. And we need to bring that more out into public consciousness, because Native people aren't the problem. The problem is the articulation and the getting out of the information of why that problem exists in the first place, and that's where it starts. It starts with treaties. You know, in Treaty 3, where I'm from, we're supposed to get agricultural implements, we're supposed to get $5, and we're supposed to get fishing nets, and we're supposed to get ammunition, amongst a whole lot of other things like education, healthcare, housing. And I find it funny because every year that I've gone to treaty days and stood there and put my signature on the registration book and got handed a crisp new $5 bill, that I didn't get a fishing net, and I certainly didn't get ammunition. Because they know enough, after all these years of not delivering on promises to First Nations people, the last thing they want to give us is ammunition.
I think the modern treaties contain inflation clauses. For those of you who haven't read the treaties, right, the original number treaties, 11 number treaties, are about probably 40, 50 pages in total. Right, the Nisga'a Treaty is 11,000 pages. So it's quite incredible, right, to see the changes that have occurred. So you have a hard time reading all of the appendices as well. And, are there any other questions?
You're referring to the Chilcotin Treaty in British Columbia? That decision?
Referring to the one the Supreme Court brought down 3 weeks ago.
Okay,
Yeah, that's Chilcotin.
Yeah. That was reflected today, because I just got word over supper that the Treaty 3 area where I'm from, there's a reserve there called Grassy Narrows. And the Supreme Court voted 7-0 to allow the forestry to continue on that traditional territory. So within a 3-week span, we have a complete about face from the highest court in the land about whether Aboriginal title, oral history, previous land use, spiritual ceremonies, how valid that is in the eyes of the court. And we have a complete reversal of that in 3 weeks. So, you know, when I was at supper, I was at a loss for words to try to define that, because that's an incredibly short span of time to have that action taken. And I know that my brothers and sisters on Grass and Arrows will be shocked and saddened by that ruling, because they've conducted a peaceful blockade of logging there for about 15 years and spent a lot of money that they didn't have to mount a legal defense fund to fight it in the courts. And now the courts have said that 15 years amounts to nothing, because they've thrown it back and they've said that logging can continue on that traditional land. So if that's a sign of what's coming, I'm not very hopeful.
Any other questions?
I could ask a question. How do you get over the visceral anger?
Neither anger or rage is an empowering emotion. In fact, it's disempowering. When I hear these things, I completely forget that as a journalist I'm trained to be objective. Because it's my people, and it's my history, it's my culture, it's my philosophy, it's my cosmology, it's my worldview, it's my spirituality, it's my future, my past, and my present. All being subjected to a rough, arbitrary hand, forcing us into places where we don't want to be, necessarily. Sometimes can't avoid. And the emotions that come out of that are difficult. And they can only be tempered by spirituality. Because the answers that we're seeking as Canadians, the answers that we're seeking as Aboriginal Canadians aren't political answers, they're spiritual ones. And we need to remember that. And if we can affect spiritual resolutions to political questions, we'll have come a long, long way. But that's the crux of the problem, because only one side wants to do that. The other side wants to rely on logic and the rule of law and their interpretation of history and their interpretation of this country. But I know something that they don't know. I know that as long as I'm willing to open myself and share my story willingly and honestly with you, that we can meet a point in time where we're able to cross the floor from each other and reach our hands out and shake, or even hug each other because we know each other, we've shared something together. And at the very moment that we do that, two things happen. One is you give me the gift of an extra heartbeat to beat against mine, and I give you an extra heartbeat to beat with yours, to celebrate in times of triumph and to give each other strength in times of sorrow and difficulty. And if we can do that as individuals, we can do that as communities. If we can do it as communities, we can do it as provinces. If we can do it as provinces, we can do it as a nation. And more importantly, we can do it as a human species. And so what we need to do for ourselves, and we're learning this as Aboriginal people, is we have to rely on our deep ingrained sense of spirituality. And let that stuff go, because it doesn't do us any good to approach anything in an attitude of rage or in anger. We need to temper it with our belief that we're all in this together. I posted a picture on Facebook the other day, and it had a picture of Earth from space, and the label on it said, "A family portrait." And that's the truth, because we're all here on this planet together. We don't have another one, we just have this one. Similarly, we only have this country. And what we need to do is find the spiritual resonance within each of us that says, we want this to be the true north, strong and free. We want this to be our home, because that's what it means, you know, Canada. It means Kanata in the original language, and it means our village, our home. Not just me, not just the people who sing like me, dance like me, eat like me, pray like me, sing like me, but we, all of us together, our home, Canada, Canada. We need to remember that.
I have nothing to add.
Any other questions? Yes. Right here, okay, sure.
My name is Emeritus Elder, and I'm number 19. Or I was.
Shirley, do you want, maybe I can ask you to come up and.
Emeritus Elder, that's my Anishinaabe name, that's who I am. And the other life, number 19. I'm a translator, and also I didn't lose language when I went to a residential school. My father kept me at home for 10 years so that I would have firm foundation in my brain, my memory. So I never lost it, I kept it in there. And every night I would practice talking to myself. That's how I kept the language. So today I'm a translator and I'm a fluent speaker. I do a lot of research on language and what do they mean. So the truth, and when the truth and reconciliation words came out, and by the way, I was at the reconciliation when the apology came. I sat in the gallery among my fellow students. I never seen anything so insightful because everyone that was up there had a Kleenex in their hand. It was the first time that we felt an acknowledgement, and it felt really, really good. So the truth and reconciliation, the word that we came up with in speaking with the other elders and fluent speakers, reconciliation in our language means Nausijigewin. And Nausijigewin means the art of fixing it. So we need to fix it, whatever has been done in the past. And how do we do that? So we need to begin the relationship of talking to one another. We need to fix it first before we can go on. Because that's what I said.
Part of fixing it means understanding or believing that Aboriginal people have histories and have ideas about how the world operates. Eric Wolfe, a British historian, talks about a people without history. What colonization does is remove people's histories. It reconceptualizes them as people without history. And so I think part of reconciliation is understanding that we have histories as well, and that we have stories to tell that tell us how we came to be here, how we ought to live, the challenges of living in this world as well.
I think Richard should have the last word, so I'll go first. I guess the act of writing Conversations with the Dead Man for me was ultimately an act of imagination. I had to imagine how it was that Duncan Campbell Scott should have believed the things he believed, done the things he did, and beyond that some of the people I know in my own life. They would say to me, my grandfather was the bishop of the Yukon and the principal of the Yukon Residential School, and he was a progressive man, and things were good in the Yukon school, even if they were bad elsewhere. And everything I read indicated that things were no better in that school than anywhere else. And people in my society, if I can put it that way, the mainstream, this is difficult, the past is difficult for us, I think, to look back on. But I think it's a necessary basis for moving forward, not so that we can feel shameful, not so that we can feel guilty, but just so that we can understand that there were reasons for what happened. We can appreciate the depth of suffering that was inflicted on Aboriginal people, and with that understanding, we can then move forward.
In these politically correct times, people often struggle with what to call me. Do we call you First Nation? Do we call you Aboriginal? Do we call you Native? Do we call you Indigenous? What do we call you? Well, I'm a member of the original people of this country. And it's my belief that anybody who has drawn their first breath on the soil of this country, anybody who has been married here, who has raised children here, has laid loved ones to rest in the breast of the earth on this country, anyone whose history begins and ends here, has the right to call themselves native to this country. So that what we term these days as native issues aren't Aboriginal issues, they're Canada's issues. And if we can come to agree on that definition, then this whole notion of a native problem disappears, because it's not a native problem, it's a Canada problem. And we work on it together. And if our government isn't forthcoming enough to start working on the nut of the issues and start making resolutions to solve them, then as a native family, we get rid of them and find something.
And I think what Richard says is true. We have, now in 1969, the government of Canada proposed the dissolution of the Indian Act, the repeal of the Indian Act, the dissolution of eventually Indian reserves, right, and a complete change, a policy of termination. In 1995, the government of Canada said that Aboriginal people have the right to self-government, and that this was a constitutionally protected, constitutionally included right. What that means, we don't know. But we've gone from an official policy of termination to a statement of self-government. Those of you who follow Aboriginal politics may not know that there were, in fact, two apologies. There was a statement of reconciliation that came out in 1996, which people believed to be an apology. And it occurred on January 8, 1996, right? And there's this joke that goes around in the Indigenous community that said that the government would apologize when hell freezes over. And then the ice storm hit, right? On the same day. On exactly the same day that the government apologized. So we may have some power on our side. And then the first apology didn't take, right? The first apology, I don't know whether any of you know the history of the first apology, the statement of reconciliation. It wasn't really an apology, but it wasn't a statement of reconciliation. It was an official statement of the government of Canada read somewhere near the House of Commons, or inside the House of Commons, not on the floor. But it was prepared largely by Aboriginal organizations who drafted the document with the help of lawyers, right? I mean, government is still concerned with liability, but it was primarily an Aboriginal document that emerged out of that. And the government apologized, and it didn't take. So a decade later, you have another apology. So we've had 2 apologies now. And apologies in psychological literature implies that one acknowledges what has happened, acknowledges transgression, says that one is sorry, and pledges and says what they're going to do differently. There has to be an action component to reconciliation, and it's the action that is part of the reconciliation. And so it's the action after the apology that becomes quite important. And so the challenge now is, how are you going to act differently now that we live in a state in which the state has officially apologized for its actions? And how do we begin to create this we that Richard and Mark are talking about? How do we build this nation? Nation building is part of reconciliation, right, as well. How do we build this home, right, that our national anthem talks about, our home on native land, our home and native land, right, as well. So those are the issues around reconciliation that I think are extremely important. It's not an Aboriginal issue. It's a Canadian issue. And all of us have a part in reconciliation. And we all have, I think, a large part. So the challenge for you now is to go out and commit, as I say to my students, acts of reconciliation. Right? Do something different. Try to make a difference. So I want to thank you very much. Right? Oh, you have a comment?
Just a question, with the attempt to destroy all of the truth, surely that is a step backwards from attempting reconciliation. And with the truth and reconciliation, somebody attempting to destroy all that truth.
If we believe that reconciliation is going to be a straightforward, simple process, then I think we will have deceived ourselves, right? And the state, I would think, has an interest in trying not to bring the truth out, right, as well. But I think we have to ensure that the truth does come out. I like what Thomas King has to say in Truth About Stories. He always ends his chapters by saying that now you've heard the story, you can never say that you've never not heard the story. And what you do is now up to you. What you do with the story is now up to you. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, and thank you.
Thank you, David, Richard, and Mark, to all 3 of you for your very powerful words. It's so important to be continuing this conversation that we began speaking about here last year with Thomas King and Lee Maracle and Jim Hayden Taylor. And your radically different and yet closely related work will certainly help open the minds of your readers to the realities of the Aboriginal experience of the past, the near past, the present. And it's part of the healing process, so we thank you for your words, both written and spoken. The authors will be signing copies of the books up in the lobby very shortly. Refreshments will be served there. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.